Thank you very much for all of you. I'm aware that this is a difficult day and a difficult hour. Please bear with me. Due to time constraints, I will be quick, so pay attention. The Aramaic New Jerusalem is a composition known only from Qumran, preserved in multiple copies, 6 or 7, depending who is counting, which are all fragmentary, some of them very fragmentary, and present certain overlaps between them. The composition as a whole can be described as a revelatory description of a temple city, which presents very detailed and pedantic descriptions and measures of the walls, gates, streets, and residences of the city. These parts are relatively well preserved, as well as descriptions of the temple, its vessels, and its rituals, which are highly fragmentary. There are also snippets of what seems to be an eschatological word, perhaps, and the overall structure and contents of the composition are by and large still unknown. Scholarly interests in the New Jerusalem tend to focus on its contribution to ancient architecture and city planning, to our knowledge of traditions and ideas concerning the eschatological Jerusalem and the temple, and on its relation to certain other early Jewish or early compositions, in particular the temple description in the last part of Ezekiel, the temple scroll, and the revelation of John. Issues pertaining to ritual law within the New Jerusalem have been by and large neglected in research. This is understandable due to the highly fragmentary nature of passages dealing with ritual, as well as to their limited scope. However, these passages do present certain peculiar contents which may have broader implications, including concerning the literary and or socio-historical context of the scope of the composition. Most, let's say, ritual passages are concentrated in the copy 11Q18 of the New Jerusalem, of which a few words are required. Unlike most manuscripts found in Qumran, this manuscript was indeed discovered as a complete roll or scroll, however, a petrified one. This petrified scroll could not be rolled open. However, several fragments were cut out from it by the scholars. Unfortunately, this process was not recorded, and thus the order of the fragments is unknown. Moreover, since the fragments were manually cut out, their physical form is non-indicative of their order, by and large. Last but not least, there are almost no overlaps between this copy and other copies of the New Jerusalem. Therefore, any suggestion for joins between the various fragments of this scroll, including those that I will present today, remain mainly, if not solely, on text and content. Some support can be found from material considerations, namely due to mainly two factors. First, most fragments of the 11Q18 scroll preserve the upper margins, which means that line alignment between different fragments is usually secure. Second, in the cases that I will present today, I verified that the line spacing in the different fragments is identical. This does not prove that these joins are correct, but at least it makes them possible. Let us therefore begin. The first join that I will present starts from a join that was suggested by the official editors of the 11Q18. One of them, I hope, will be here, but I don't see either people up here. Maybe he will come. The editors joined fragments 16 and 17 based on the textual continuum between lines 1 and 2, V'todat hon ufis hon, their thank offering and their Pesach offering, as well as in lines 2 and 3, Mekablin min yed hon, V'chana and Mekablin min yed hon, and the priests receive from their hand. The following word was read by the editors as defashtu, which they stretch out, which is possible, but nevertheless yields a somewhat awkward clause. I would like to take a closer look on this word. The first letter is certainly Dalet. It is followed, however, by what I prefer to read as a mem, and then the right part of an aleph. Therefore, I read here Dma, blood, and the sentence as a whole reads, V'chaimaya mekablim min yedhom dma, and the priests received from their hand the blood. The question thus arises, received from whom? Enter fragment 30. Here, in line 2, one can read Levaye Dabchim, the priests, the Levites, slaughtered, a clause that nicely combines with the following line in fragments 16 and 17 and yields a complete sentence. Yet, or again, the Levites slaughtered, and the priests received from their hand the blood, something, something, something. This combination is further supported by the textual continuum between lines 3 and 4. La leheve alel le kol enash, something bar min mo'adei el. That is, no person shall enter it, something except on the festivals of God. Both of these reconstructed lines touch upon issues that were addressed and debated in various early Jewish compositions, and I will turn to them now. First, they touch upon the question, who slaughters the sacrifice? According to New Jerusalem, according to my reconstruction, the Levites slaughter, and the priests receive from the head the blood. This aligns with statements in Ezekiel, who declares that the Levites shall slaughter the burnt offering and the sacrifice for the people, as well as with 2 Chronicles, which describes how the priests dashed the blood from the hands of the Levites. The Levites had to slaughter the Passover lamb for everyone who was not clean. And lastly, also in the temple scroll, which describes that the sons of Levi shall slaughter, and the priests, the sons of Aaron, shall sprinkle their blood of the sacrifices, not of the Levites. Now, these statements seem quite straightforward, and all of them very clearly deviate from Pentateuchal law. Thus, we read in Leviticus chapter 1 that when any of you bring an offering to the Lord, he shall slaughter the bull before the Lord. And Aaron's son, the priest, shall offer the blood, and so on and so forth. Similarly, apparently also in Josephus, who writes that an individual who offers a holocaust kills an ox or other animal, the beast being slaughtered, the priest drenches with the blood the circuit of the altar, and so on and so forth. Lastly, the assumption that non-priests slaughter the sacrifice is also the common assumption throughout rabbinic literature. To give only one example from Mishnah Zvachim, the slaughter of an offering is valid whether done by non-priests, by women, by slaves, and so on and so on and so forth. Thus, the New Jerusalem scroll deviates here from what seems to be the biblical norm, though it does align with other Second Temple writings, including the Temple scroll, which may or may not be significant. The question arises whether this deviation and alignment represent an actual reality, the practice in the temple at the time, some ideal concept of how ritual should be done, or exegesis of one or other Pentateuchal or other authoritative sources, and these kind of questions will continue to appear also in the next cases that I will present. Another point that arises in the reconstructed passage is the idea that none shall pass into the sacred precincts, or does it? The reconstructed passage reads that no person shall enter it except on the festival of God. And a similar statement may be found in Ezekiel, again, chapter 46, where Ezekiel declares that the gate of the inner court that faces the east shall remain closed. But on the Sabbath day and on the day of the new moon it shall be opened. The prince shall enter by the vestibule of the gate, and the people of the land shall bow down at the entrance of that gate on the Sabbath and on the new moon, and also on other festivals. So Ezekiel allowed here to some kind of entry, or at least approachment, by non-priests into the sacred precincts. It's a very restricted entry, and something similar may be meant also in the New Jerusalem passage. However, I did not find any other exact parallel to this idea in our Second Temple or later literature, and I do wonder whether the New Jerusalem reflects here some kind of tradition or actual practice, or simply, or not simply, reflects an application of Ezekiel's regulation. With this question mark, I move on to the next fragment. We begin with fragment 13, a relatively large fragment, which describes a bull which was skinned. Its legs and entrails are to be washed and salted, and then the whole thing is to be put on fire. Fine flour should be brought, and something should be poured as a libation. All of these details pertain to the process of offering a bull whole grain offering. This fragment can be associated with another one, a smaller one, fragment 29. Not too much is preserved from it, but it does mention oil on line 4, and apparently also reach nichoach, the pleasing odor, in line 6. Both details also pertain to sacrifices and possibly also to animal sacrifices, and therefore it makes sense to associate both fragments. And indeed, if they are juxtaposed the way I presented them here, they, both fragments, 13 plus 29, yield a sequence of camel solid, fine flour, the form of a se'ah of oil, and the form of a se'ah of something which is poured as a libation on the altar. This is very likely wine. And just as line 3 says, ve'aiti kemach, and he brought flour, so also I would suggest restoring in line 5, ve'aiti chma, and he brought wine, form of a se'ah, and for the libation. This sequence of fine flour, oil, and wine is a standard sequence for the non-animal ingredients accompanying animal sacrifices, particularly a whole grain offering. However, some details in this reconstructed passage are less standard. First of all, something dry, measures. Twice, this passage mentions fourth of a se'ah. Now, se'ah is a measure for dry materials, such as grain, but here it is associated with oil and wine, that is, it's used to measure liquids. This is unusual, but comparable to another Aramaic composition, the Aramaic Levite document, where one reads that the oil for sacrifice, the fourth of a se'ah for the bull, and wine according to the measure of the oil, and so on and so forth. It may be that this unusual use of dry measures for liquid is related to the Aramaic language of these two compositions. Again, I leave this as a question for further research. Another puzzling detail in this passage concerns the pouring of the wine. According to line 5, the wine is to be poured, fourth of a se'ah, into the troughs, lego mukebada. What feature exactly is meant here is not clear. However, what is clear is that the wine is to be poured to somewhere upon the altar, maybe near the altar, but not on the sacrifice itself, not directly on the fire. And this particular detail resonates with other sources from Second Temple period and later. Thus we read, for instance, in Betsira, that he, the high priest, poured the wine at the foundations of the altar. Relatedly but differently in Josephus, who said that those who offer a sacrifice are pouring the wine as a libation around the altar. And lastly, rabbinic literature speaks about pouring the wine into particular vessels called bowls upon the altar. Thus, for instance, in Tosefta Sukkah, we read that there were 2 silver bowls on the top of the altar, one for libation of water and the other for wine. Each of these sources offer a different description, but all of them, including the New Jerusalem, agree that the wine is poured beside the sacrifice, not directly on the fire. This statement becomes all the more interesting or problematic when compared to the following line in the New Jerusalem. And it is fragmentary, begins, according to my reconstruction, that the pleasing order, something, 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 and the flesh mixes together. Based on the ingredients mentioned in the previous lines, I suggest reconstructing the lacuna in line 6 as the hamra unshifa. That is, the pleasing odor of the wine, the wheat flour, and the flesh mixes together. As you can see, this reconstruction fills in nicely the lacuna, not only in this SBL Hebrew transcript, but also in the 11Q18 font. And it is can be further corroborated by comparison to other early Jewish compositions concerning the mixing of the pleasing odor. And thus, for instance, in the Pentateuch scroll, again, we read that he, the priest, shall burn all of it on the altar, together with its grain offering and its libation, an offering by fire, a pleasing odor to the Lord. Similarly, in the book of Jubilees, all of these you shall burn as a pleasing odor before God, with its grain offering and its libation as a pleasing odor. The idea that the wine should be actually burnt in the fire and give good smell can be derived actually from a Pentateuchal legislation itself. Thus, in Numbers 15 verse 10, we read that he, the one who brings an offering, shall present as a drink offering half a hin of wine as an offering by fire, a pleasing odor to the Lord. Thus, the Aramaic New Jerusalem offers mixed evidence. On the one hand, it tells us that the wine should be poured into the troughs. That is, not directly on the fire itself, and aligns with compositions such as Ben Sira, Josephus, or the Mishnah. On the other hand, it states that, apparently states, that the pleasing odor of the wine, the wheat flour, and the flesh should mix together. It seems to suggest that the wine is burned along with the other ingredients of the sacrifice, as we've seen in the Temple Scroll of Jubilees, maybe also in the Pentateuch. How to reconcile both statements? I would like to suggest that the New Jerusalem attempts here a kind of an exegetical compromise. On the one hand, avoiding pouring the wine on the fire for whatever reason, but at the same time, affirming that the wine should give, or indeed does give, a pleasing odor. And a similar combination of statements can actually be found in the passage from Ben Sira, to which I alluded. Ben Sira said that he poured the wine at the foundation of the altar, a pleasing odor to the Most High, the King of all. The last drawing that I will not present here concerns fragments 31 and 32. How they relate to each other and what the construction I suggest will have to wait for another occasion where we will have some more time. I would like, therefore, to conclude or offer some remarks concerning ritual in the Aramaic New Jerusalem. I hope I managed to convince you that there is more to say on this subject, and certainly much more to be done in terms of textual and material reconstruction of the scroll, establishing the order of the fragments and trying to reach better understanding of the overall order of the composition. I attempted to highlight some connections between the New Jerusalem and the larger Aramaic corpus from Qumran. There is more to be said about that, as well as how the New Jerusalem can be incorporated into the larger network of temple traditions across different compositions from the New Temple period and later. In particular, I noted some correspondences or points of contact between the New Jerusalem and the Temple Scroll, an issue that has been dealt by several scholars. And I tried to show how, and examples that I showed today present both shared traditions, sometimes striking traditions between them, but also deviations and even contradictions between different compositions, which on the one hand do not allow to speak simplistically on a direct contact or even a genetic relationship between them, but do strongly suggest that they share common literary traditions and maybe also some kind of a social historical shared milieu. This, however, will have to requires further investigation, of course. I look forward for your comments, but before moving to the Q&A, all the sources that I presented are included in a handout, which I uploaded to my academia webpage, and it's accessible to use this QR code, read it on your free time. Again, thank you very much. I look forward for your comments.